I'm so pumped to have with me Alec Alenstein. Alec is the COO and advisor who's built and scaled companies across cybersecurity, risk, and data. He began in investment banking. He's advising founders now. I'm really excited to dive into your story, Alec, about systems and any kind of stories and lessons you've learned along the way, and just how you go about scaling and building your operation. So really, really happy to have you here.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'm excited to be here as well.
As I ask most of my guests, why don't you give a kind of a brief background about your career, kind of where you've been? I know that you spent some time in London, so I'd love to chat about that a bit more. But just tell me a bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you. So I started, as you mentioned, in banking. I spent some time in credit risk, but the bulk of the 10 plus years was in investment banking. I did that in both New York and in London. When I left that field, I went a more entrepreneurial route. And we could talk more about that later, but it was going to a very early stage political risk research and consulting firm that grew into the most important brand in that field, I would argue. From there, I moved more towards technology, building a financial data and analytics platform. And from there into cybersecurity, helped building a professional services business around a cybersecurity platform. And now I'm working with startups a lot and mostly with the companies of a particular venture capital firm.
Tell me about that transition, because investment banking to tech is kind of a jump, right? So tell me the thought process there.
Yeah. And I'll give you the interim step. Moving from investment banking into the startup research and consulting firm was probably the most important leap I made. That time in investment banking was fantastic. I still refer to it as the longest apprenticeship anyone will ever have, north of a decade. A lot of foundational skills that I built: analysis, strategy, sales, transactions. Wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's a very challenging lifestyle. I worked a lot of 80 and 90-hour weeks in my 20s, not something I wanted to do for a lifetime. We can talk about that more too. But when I worked in London, I had the opportunity to do work in Eastern Europe or emerging Europe. And what I realized very quickly is transactions aren't as easy to do for a variety of factors, some having to do with political drivers. So when I came back to New York, I was back in New York and settled during 9/11. Lost our building. Thankfully, myself, my father, who was working downtown, also were safe. But it created a little bit of a shift for me. I had learned about political drivers working in Eastern Europe. There were obviously political drivers around 9/11. Shortly thereafter, I met the founder of this geopolitical risk firm, and it really clicked for me that this was a need in business. And I went over there to do something entrepreneurial and to build something from scratch.
You've got to have some good stories, really harrowing stories about 9/11 and being so close up there. Anything stand out in your mind?
Yeah, the thing that stands out for me the most, and I won't go into the macro
Hmm.
description of what happened. Everybody knows that. But for me, working in Lower Manhattan, my father worked less than a quarter mile away. He was nearing the end of his career. He and I had lunch at least every couple of weeks, which I loved doing. What I was worried about is my father had a very bad back. And when I realized we were all going to have to, once we were safe, walk all the way uptown many miles, I thought he's not doing that by himself. So I made my way across town. I found him in the lobby of his building, and he said, "Oh, I have to go back upstairs for a 9:30 meeting." I said, "No, you don't. We need to be safe here for a while." And we spent some time in one of the offices on the ground floor. It wasn't operating, of course. And people were coming in off the street after the buildings had actually collapsed, looking like they'd come from Pompeii,
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
covered in ash. And we spent some time helping people clear their eyes, clear their mouths. And when we realized it was safe to leave, we walked uptown together, and we didn't look back. We didn't want to see what you could see looking back at the buildings.
Yeah. I can imagine that really lodging in your mind. But sounds like you and your dad have a great relationship,
We
which is
did,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, awesome to hear. Um, okay, so you made that jump from investment banking shortly after that over into the startup world. Um, and like you said, you were so well prepared for that nearly a decade of experience in banking, investment
Yes.
banking, to prepare you. What were some of the immediate applications that you were able to uh, uh, use with that season of your life now into a new season of life? How did you differentiate yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was a really interesting environment, very rich in human capital. There were political science PhDs. People knew more about the world from their academic backgrounds and travel that I could ever, sort of hope to have. But I was the business person there. And the founder was a natural salesperson. And I'll never forget what he said to me when I interviewed and spoke with him about how I could help build the business. He said, I know that I know a lot. I just don't know who it matters to. And I was excited because I said, here's geopolitical risk analysis. This is something that economists in global banks sort of approximate when speaking to clients, but no one's doing it on a pure play basis. And so I said, there's a market for this. And what we're going to do is build recurring revenue streams. We don't want to do one-off reports and that sort of things. We're going to create ongoing subscription advisory relationships to really help fund the business because the founder didn't want to take outside capital. And we were able to do that. So that was my immediate value, is structuring what the revenue portfolio should be and working with him to start selling it.
Yeah, immediately helpful with what the goals were. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably one of the most things I'm most proud of in my career because it was sort of join the business and we reshaped revenue and started a growth trajectory inside of 3 months.
Awesome. Yeah, that's that's awesome. So then, if I remember correct, you then pivoted into, like you said, technology and cybersecurity. What was that process like?
So that first business was called Eurasia Group, founded by Ian Bremmer, still an incredible business, but primarily focused on research and writing. The distribution channels and the availability of analyst time to do the business, it's limited. There's no leverage
Sure.
in that business. And so I wanted to think about businesses that might have not just good profitability profiles, but higher growth trajectories from a revenue standpoint. And I was increasingly interested in platform businesses. The research world was changing. This is around 2014. But as and getting personal again, as I was thinking about change, my father grew very, very ill, and my mother needed support in working through what was, a terminal illness. So I left that business and I spent a year maximizing my time with my father and helping him work through end of life. A decision I will never, never regret. Although from a career perspective, I didn't know what was on the other side. I made a decision I wanted to move more towards technology, and I rekindled a relationship with Jules Kroll, who's the father of the modern due diligence and investigations business. He had started a new business post the financial crisis, partly in due diligence and investigations, but he also started a brand new bond rating agency called Kroll Bond Ratings. I joined after meeting Jules, and speaking with him to not help build the bond rating business. They were doing fantastically well with that, but to help launch a financial data and analytics business, which was a technology platform, which we started from idea phase. And that was the transition.
Okay. Okay. So very clearly still using a lot of your skill sets that you've gained at after what, about 2 decades at this point in time.
Yeah, I was 20 years in. Um, had successfully built a subscription research business, and I had this finance foundation, which I call on to this day, every day. But this was moving back towards my financial roots. And I love that. And it was an amazing experience where I learned about technology product development, where I learned about data management. But it was also not a success, to be perfectly frank. And the lesson I learned from that was this: there was an opportunity to build what we were building, but the particular focus of our platform was dominated by an incumbent that was there for 15, 20 years. They had a huge percentage of the market. And what I didn't see was that the time to build, to make it comparable and strong enough relative to the incumbent product, was too long, too expensive, and it was hard to get over the bar of data quality and, well, data quality being the key piece to really compete while still being efficient with capital. That was going to happen regardless. We were struggling with it. As we were getting to an inflection point, that's right when COVID hit.
Mm.
And there was a brief period where people kind of pulled in their horns. And so they decided to reallocate capital back towards the core business of bond ratings. And so I ended up leaving there.
Okay. So looking back, would you have just chosen a different vehicle to use use those funds with, or would you have tried to hit it faster? Like you said, it was taking, maybe the runway was too long and it wasn't going to end up working because of those reasons. So how would you have changed that looking back?
Yeah. So a couple of things on that. First, the incumbent product was very broad in its capabilities. I would have gone much, much narrower and found maybe a gap in what the incumbent was doing and just went smaller scale, lower price, narrower capability, but filling a gap. We tried to go big, too fast, and it, of course, took too long. So that's one thing I would have done. So I think our market analysis and product development approach should have been different.
I think there's some good takeaways there, regardless of any of the listeners, for particular industries, right? It's when you do look at your competition, looking at trying not to be everything to everybody, being realistic with the resources that you do have available, but being more narrow focused. And maybe that doesn't scratch your big world dominating itch that you have, but like you are really solving a problem for people who have a really clear problem. And so to them, you are their hero that you would want to be. So I think there are some applicable lessons there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, no regrets with that. Incredible experience diving deeper into technology platform development and data management for sure. And that kind of took me onto my next step too.
Yeah, tell me about that. Where are you at now?
Yeah, so that's when I moved more towards the cybersecurity world. And what was happening was, I'd obviously worked a lot on the bond rating side too, or at least had exposure to it. In the cybersecurity world, there were businesses being created that approximated the bond ratings model. And this was a brand new concept where enterprises could hire a platform. The company I worked for was Security Scorecard. There were others out there doing something similar, like BitSite as another example, where the platform would do an external scan of an enterprise and find and evaluate all of its potential vulnerabilities and then create a score based on how secure that enterprise may well be. Lots of imperfections, but huge value created. So I joined that business not to build out its technology platform, but to create a professional services, what they call a wrap around its platform, to help elevate into more senior relationships at organizations, to create stickier revenue. Because in these recurring businesses, recurring revenue, it's all about retaining customers.
Yep.
And part of that's
Minimizing
customer
attrition. Yeah.
support. Yeah, managing that attrition level. So that was what I was brought in to do. And that, we were successful in that for a period. That business became wildly competitive quickly. And that's part of the story of technology, certainly cybersecurity today. New product categories can be created, become wildly successful, and then hyper competitive in the space of 3 to 5 years. It's happening faster and faster.
And you could choose to keep playing that game or not, I guess.
Yeah. And it's one of the things I find most fascinating about cybersecurity today. There are 4, 5, 6,000 cybersecurity startups and growth stage companies right now. A high percentage of them probably shouldn't exist because they may be challenging incumbents, same concept we talked about before, without true differentiation. They may be they might be solving a problem that people don't really have, or they're just a Me Too product. And if you look at the buyer side of that equation, the chief information security officers, the CISOs, they don't want to have 80 tools. And that's the volume of entities pitching them on a monthly or quarterly basis right now. They need to consolidate around a handful of core platforms and then fill gaps. So it's a really fascinating market where the opportunity is huge, but you have to be in a category that matters.
It's kind of the opposite of what I was saying earlier. It's like the market is demanding the reverse of you don't need a niche product. You need an all-inclusive product at this point in time.
And that should be the core in a typical security program. You need something that's not quite all-encompassing, but you need a handful. Because the other thing is that security teams aren't always that well staffed. They're bandwidth constrained, so their ability to handle 30 or 40 niche products, severely limited. It just doesn't work to actually operationalize the technology.
Yeah. So does that bring you to present where you're at now with doing advising? And so what does that look like kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I've grown increasingly close to Squadra Ventures, a Baltimore-based venture capital firm. They focus on cybersecurity and national security technologies. I spend more time with the cyber and some data management related investments they have. And there's one in particular called CISO ExecNet, where I'm spending a lot of time right now. It's not really a technology business. It's sort of cybersecurity adjacent. And what we're doing is focusing not on the technology platforms, but the buyers, the chief information security officers. It's a massive membership organization that's actually supporting the practitioners in the cybersecurity world and doing it's peer engagement and helping the CISOs learn from each other. But what we're building now, and this is where I'm spending all of my time, is creating an expert network from this 2,000 plus CISO membership group, where they are going to amplify their expertise outside of the membership organization and into the startup world and into the investor world, and help the investors and the startups actually figure out what these CISOs need by telling them, this is how I run my program. This is what I actually need. And sometimes the feedback is encouraging, and sometimes it might feel too blunt. But we're getting a lot of appetite from the investor community, the startup community, and a lot of excitement from our CISOs.
That's crazy because that sums up your career completely, right? Like that's full circle at that point in time, connecting all of those dots. So super excited.
Yeah, and I'm having so much fun doing it.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's awesome. Can't wait to hear more about how that's going in the near future. I want to get a little bit tactical now that we've kind of chatted about your career progression. What are some operational takeaways? Well, let me back up. Do you have particular stories in mind about inefficiencies that you found and how you went about solving those inefficiencies, whether that's capital inefficiencies or people inefficiencies? Would love to chat if you have anything come to mind about those kind of stories.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent most of my last 20 years in early stage companies. When things work really well, they move towards true growth stage. Where I see the most inefficiency, right? And we're not talking about large companies that really need to focus on managing expense. Of course, that matters to all companies, but growth stage companies need to focus on revenue, right? They need to really figure out how they're going to do it. And it's on the sales side where I see massive inefficiency.
Mm.
And often it's because maybe a technical founder, right, understands the client's plight, the problem they're trying to solve for them, and they can build the platform that's going to do it. And with all of that, technical acumen, they can do a lot of founder-led selling. And that's great. That should happen in the early years. But when you make the move, maybe you've raised a round of financing, part of the use of proceeds is to build sales capability. They hire too senior too fast, where
Mm.
maybe it's someone who has experience in managing a team of 40. It's not what you need.
Mm.
What you need to systematize very quickly is your discovery process. And then you need to find a few executives who are comfortable and good at doing discovery, but also comfortable in a relatively unstructured environment. So finding account execs who are comfortable with it, don't need to be managers. They just want to go out and win business, and they're really good at discovery. Those are kind of foundational things to moving from founder-led selling to a sales team.
How does that work with as you're scaling your team? I can understand on the founder-led selling where like for every founder, you are probably the most passionate about your product, your service that you are trying to push. So that passion will drive the sales. When it comes time to scale, though, you had said that hiring senior managers doesn't make sense. Like we need revenue. We don't need management, we need revenue. And so let's take a bigger picture here. How then can founders kind of keep that passion flowing or at least like have a clearer handoff, I guess, to the sales pros?
Right. So what I like to see, right, is sometimes you have technical founders who've been leading a very challenging lifestyle, right? They're doing everything, and they've likely been told by their investors, you need to keep selling, right? When you have the opportunity to start hiring sales, sometimes that founder is saying, I don't have to sell anymore. Can't do it. Right. So you've got account execs and you're effectively you're a sales manager at that point too, but you're gaining leverage. So it's not a true handoff. You need to think about it as a founder as gaining leverage. This person, if I work with them and train them, can do discovery efficiently, will create those repeatable processes. And if that account exec sort of needs to bring me in because I'm still the best seller of the product, absolutely. But I haven't had to do all the legwork to get to that point. So that's kind of that first phase. From there, especially if you've had your account execs in the room with you and they know more and more about what's working and what isn't, the handoff starts to happen.
Yeah, I like that. That it is not a 100% handoff, and it never will be to a degree. Like I think maybe founders don't always have the bigger pictures. Like we are in this for the long haul, and and there will be better people that are hired to kind of take ownership. But at the end of the day, true ownership, true responsibility will always fall on the founder.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But there's a couple other things that are related that are critical, and they're in two different
Mhm.
directions. For example, is like, let's say you're selling to enterprise and you start to get traction, you're starting to close. Those enterprise sales contracts take a while to actually get done, even when the answer is yes. You need to have someone in there who's good at shepherding through that process, aligning all the relevant stakeholders at the enterprise, getting through procurement. Terrible use of time for a founder.
Yeah, for
As
sure.
soon as the founder can lift out of that, that's great. On the other side, as that discovery is happening and as you're getting closer to closing deals, that feedback, and this is another inefficiency I wanted to point out,
Mhm.
that feedback needs to get back to the product development team. Because if your product team is working in too much of a silo and they're not getting the market feedback because they're not in those meetings, you're going to create massive inefficiency and you're not going to move toward that repeatable process from a sales perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. We don't want to develop a product that doesn't long term keep serving the people we want, our target
Right.
market. That doesn't make sense. Okay. Yep. I appreciate those views on inefficiencies. That makes a lot of sense. Kind of going back to the previous question, the two-parter question about inefficiencies, but now kind of any specific takeaways that listeners can apply in their business. Listeners who are business leaders who um, we'll talk about the startup type environment, that ecosystem, because it is very different from the enterprise level. So what when you're thinking about coaching and advising, how would you, one, what do you typically see, and two, how would you advise in that?
So if a startup has partnered with a private capital, a venture firm, or whatever other form it takes, you want to look to those partners as supportive elements, but there's a limit to that. But what I like to talk about, what I like to do myself, but what I'd like to do with founders as an operator is talk about the importance of focusing on the most accretive activity. That's the way the investors think about it. If you've got a managing partner of a venture firm, he or she may have a dozen or more portfolio companies and they're constantly being pulled in different directions. Maybe they're raising a new fund themselves. Maybe they're looking at closing a new investment. They're constantly having to reprioritize about what they're focusing on. That's how they view the world. They want you as a founder to do the same thing. Within your company, what's the most accretive activity you can work on today? It may be the one that's the one you want to do least, but keep prioritizing and do that thing you can't stand first. Knock it out first. And then you get to the marginal stuff at the end of the day if there's time. If that part slides, not a big issue.
Yeah, time management. Yeah,
I
being
think it's one of the when you're having to self-manage as a leader, that's critical.
and the items of priority aren't always clearly defined, and so that does take some, little bit of probably probably long nights thinking through about how will you best spend your time to serve the most people and make the best decisions. So yeah, there does need to be some discernment and wisdom with approaching that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Alec, this was awesome. I knew it was going to be chatting with you, hearing about your background. You have a really, really cool stories. And so very happy to have you on OpsOwners to be able to share that. So I appreciate you for being here.
Thanks so much, Ken. It's been a lot of fun.